Okay. So, hello, it is cold. That's all you guys are talking about is how cold it is. It is, it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. Okay, so today is our third lecture on fish biodiversity. The first one, we talked about the jawless fishes, and we talked about the chondrichthyans. Got the vertebrate snapomorphes, talked about the cyclostomes, so the jawless, hagfish, and lamprey. And then we went up, we learned a bunch of characters for Gnathostomata, the jawed vertebrates. Then we went over here to the cartilaginous vertebrates, talked about the ratfishes, and then the elasmopranks, so things like sharks and stingrays. And then on Thursday last week, we went up this way. We learned a bunch of the characters for osteichthyans, the bony vertebrates, which is everything else on this tree, including you. You are an osteichthyan. And then we took a right at that half of vertebrate diversity that is actinopterygians, the ray-finned bony fishes. There's that, just to reorient us from lab yesterday. And we're going up into actinopterygii. This is where there's so many fishes. And I showed you this phylogeny that I am putting up here, not because you have to know it, not because you have to know what all these fish are. You certainly shouldn't know what all these fish are. You might, that'd be awesome. But again, the point of the lectures we're doing right now with biodiversity is to expose you guys to, like, I hope, crazy cool stuff, so that when you pick a project, you might pick a fish or a frog or something that you didn't hear before, instead of everybody picking like cheetah or something like that. And so, had you look at this already? These words that I put in bold, I changed these slides a little bit from Thursday because I felt like I was confusing you guys. Anything that's in bold on the fishy slides are the names I care that you know what that means. So I didn't give you any characters for actinopterygii because there aren't really any good anatomical characters. There are many of them that exist, but I don't want to give them to you because they're all like details of like tissue attachments and things that I think are sort of like not helpful. So I'm choosing not to give you a little red tick mark for actinopterygii, but I want you to know it's all of the ray-finned fishes of today. And then I threw all these words up there because I want you to have some way to orient yourself if you go on your own Wikipedia adventure, your own literature search adventure. But the only words I actually care about you knowing are teleos, and we're going to get to it today, acanthomorphs. And both of those are going to have characters associated with them. So they're going to have slides that are about like, how do we know an acanthomorph? How do we know a teleos? You actually already learned the teleos characters last Thursday. There were 3 of them. Before we went up into the teleos, just our actinop refresher, this is all from Thursday. We talked about these really ancient groups of actinops that go back to before dinosaur times. Cool. There's things like the gar and the bowfin that are closer to the rest than these ones are. Things like the sturgeon and the paddlefish. You guys saw the paddlefish and sturgeon in lab yesterday. There's living actinops that aren't teleosed. They're very much not as diverse as the teleost are. 8 species, 12 species. There's 34,000 species of teleost actinopterygii. And then we started getting into the biodiversity and how there's too many teleosts. So you've seen this already, so I'm going to do it fast. I gave you 3 characters for teleos. I'll let you go look at your own notes to remember what those were. Here they are on the board. And we started to meet teleos. So we met a couple of the early divergent groups. We met things like eels, tarpon, all these crazy South American and African freshwater fish and rivers and stuff like that. Electrosensory stuff, really crazy. And then we kind of got interrupted on Thursday by the end of class when we were up here now within teleos, a couple notches within teleos in this clade called Asteriophysi. You don't have to know that name, but I want you to see it. And I told you guys that 80% of the freshwater fish species of the world are in this clade, Asteriophysi. And so there's a couple kind of ocean fish in here, herrings and anchovies. You saw this on Thursday. Goldfish, carp, suckers, minnows, daces. A lot of Idaho fishes are right here in these 3 pictures being represented. We left off basically on Thursday in this gigantic group of freshwater fishes. And I feel like this is exactly where we got interrupted and I didn't quite finish what I wanted to say. So I've been blabbing at you for a minute. Talk to your neighbors. What were those 3 teleos characters? And maybe look up here at the where we left off and freshen yourself up. And if you know anything about these fish, if you have questions about these fish. Okay. All right, what were those three teleos characters? Homocircle tail. Pharyngeal jaws, so down in their throat, another set of jaws that aren't the maxilla, premax, and dentary. Okay, and then
Extendable premaxilla.
yeah, the premaxilla is mobile. They can open their mouth and make like a whoa. You can see that with some of these. So the homocircle tail is one you guys saw in lab yesterday. So it's just a tail that's even on the top and bottom. Part of the slide you saw about the homocircle tail talked about something I had mentioned, but it's the heterocircle tail, which is the ancestral tail for all these swimming jawed vertebrates, where the dorsal lobe of the tail has vertebrae that go up into it. So that's the ancestral condition. These fishes are teleos, and so were the eels we saw a second ago. And now we're in the middle of this. Any observations or questions about these fishes? I know you know things about them, like with the piranhas and stripping flesh. And I'm saving it. I really want you to remember this face. Pacus are really close relatives of piranhas, and this clade of South American, they're called crassiform, South American crassiform fishes are really famous for their teeth. That's an African one there with those big, gnarly, obviously huge carnivorous teeth. But this pacu here, once we get to it, I'll show you a picture, basically has your teeth in its mouth, like its whole teeth look very human. It's really upsetting. So in this group, the other one I really want to mention, I think it's really important, and I would encourage somebody, if you're interested, to look into it, is animals like this, the electric eel. Now, we've already seen a couple different kinds of vertebrates that have electro powers. Most times, it's like electrosensory. Electrical currents travel really well in water, so you're going to find a lot of aquatic organisms that have electrosensory or electrocution sometimes abilities. Makes sense, right? That like animals on land don't like electrocute each other because we can't really conduct electricity through the air. But this eel is one of the most powerful zaps in the animal kingdom. And so you guys know from like introbiology that like across the cell, a membrane of a cell, you can create like an electric differential, and that's how you get ions to move around. A lot of electroconducting animals do is they just like build like a membrane on a membrane on a membrane on a membrane, build up a giant like stack of them, so that change of like whatever it is, potassium ions that go like this, is so intense that you get an actual zap. Super cool. I don't want to get too far into it, but these animals are the only ones that don't just like defend themselves with electricity, like they hunt with electricity. They will come up behind a fish and go, and then they eat it. There's a couple of little stingrays from a couple lectures ago. We talked about, there was this torpedo rays. They also do electrical stuff in the same way. And they like swim over a fish, drop their pectoral fins like around it and zap it. Super cool. And totally convergent and completely differently structured ways of like building electrical power in your body. Really wild. All right, the last group of Astariophysians that you have to just take in for a second are catfishes. Talk to your neighbors for a second, read that sentence, look at these pictures. What do you know about catfishes? All right, what do we, I'm hearing a lot of good stuff. Catfishes have a lot of connections to humans. So what are some catfish things you had to talk about? I just heard it all.
We talked about them all having whiskers or some sort of.
Yeah, why they have the name catfish, right? It looks like they have whiskers. So these like sensory barbels, they're called, or barbules. One thing that's pretty interesting about catfishes is that these are all covered in like chemosensory buds, pretty much what you could call taste buds. So those are all them tasting like their environment out in front of their mouths. So a lot of catfishes live in fresh water, but not all of them. Those little babies over there are a school that live out in the ocean. So they all swim as a big unit to like confuse predators. It's very fun. But they are mostly in murky water and in fresh water. So you can, a lot of them have pretty reduced eyes. They're sensing with their whiskers going along on the bottom sometimes. This one's absolutely super well adapted to like feeding off the bottom. It almost looks like a little ray or something like that, but it's a catfish. What other things people talking about?
Their skin is different. It's like a leathery plus scale.
It's a soft skin. They don't really have hard scales. Yeah, they've lost a lot of their scales. So they're very smooth fishes, very smooth fishes. They live everywhere. They're all throughout human history and human culture. There's tons of legends from all over the world that have to do with big catfishes and like things like that. Some catfishes are able to cross land. They're able to walk around. They leave the water and kind of snake it. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. They also have incredible diets. There's herbivorous catfishes. Most catfishes are carnivorous. Some of these armored catfishes, you guys probably recognize from like fish tanks and stuff, because they're like algae eaters on the side of a fish tank, or people have them as cute little pets. Some of those armored catfishes from South America are some of the only fishes that like eat wood. Like a downed tree that's waterlogged at the bottom of the river, they'll go onto it, slam their face onto it. It's all smushy because it's just waterlogged, and then they just like eat into the wood. What they're trying to get at is the fungi that's digesting the wood for them, but they ingest tons and tons and tons of wood in their little catfishes. Very cool. We're going to talk about that. Any other catfish things? We have them around here.
They have like crushing plates.
So yeah, some of them have a dentition on the tops of their mouth, so that when they catch something like a little clam or a little snail, they can like get it down in there. Catfishes are super cool. I think it's really funny that this is not the most speciose group of like fishes like this. We're going to talk about another one later, but there are over 3,100 kinds of catfishes. And so I saw this sentence in this like paper that was talking about fish diversity, which I thought was just funny, that 1 out of every 20 or 25 vertebrates is a catfish. That's a little bit upsetting if you didn't know it already. So if one of you guys wants to do something on catfishes, pick one. Don't do 3,000 of them. All right, so that was the Stereophysi. So things like carps and minnows, things like piranhas and tetras, things like catfishes. That up there, that was 80% of freshwater fish diversity. So now we're moving up. Here's another clade that is monophyletic, has that trout and everything else on the slide we haven't talked about yet, called the Euteliaceae. That means the true teleos. This is not a word you're responsible for. It's just a word that might help you navigate if you get into fishes. The first big group of Eutelios, you guys know them. Things like trout and salmon and graylings, which are all in an order together. Things like pikes, and then some other weirdos. So we're going to do the catfish thing again. Talk to your neighbors. Do you have any prior knowledge about trouts or salmons or any of these other fishes up here before I start vlogging? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So drain the cats. They also have like fishes. A lot of connections. Which is weird if you want to leave. They have that identity. Maybe also like my question.
All right, what kind of things do we know about these fishes?
Some of the species are venomous.
What's an adrenous mean? I think probably everybody knows something about the fact that salmon live their lives as adults out in the oceans for the most part, and then swim up rivers. They find their home river and they go over waterfalls and through the mouths of bears to get to this one patch of rocks where they can spawn their eggs. Then those babies hatch in the river, wash out to sea. So there's other fishes that do that alongside them, things like lamprey. I told you guys about some of the other animals like eels that live in like America and Europe that do the opposite. They live their adult lives in the freshwater and they have their babies out in the ocean. So all kinds of interesting reproductive migratory things. Salmon and trout are one of the most like commercially and societally important fishes like in the world. Almost everybody who gets a fishing license is trying to catch things like trout. Maybe they're trying to catch like a bass or something. But these are incredibly important governmental fish, regulated fish. Dams on the Snake River are being talked about being dismantled because of things like sockeye salmon that would go up to lakes in Idaho. So huge government expenditure, huge monitoring budgets. These fishes are fishes humans care a lot about, those top two anyway. What other things? Salmon also like metamorphose, right? When they spawn, like they look like nice silverfish in the ocean, and then when they come into breed, they turn red and the males get really gnarly hooked faces and all kinds of cool stuff happens. Anybody know anything about these other fish?
Barrel and steep. We were trying to discuss like we couldn't remember.
What's going on here? What is this? It is weird. Give me something else. Where's the eyeballs? Here? Those are the nostrils? Those green things are the eyeballs? So this fish has a dome of jelly over its head and its eyes point straight up. It lives in like the dark water, but not the black water of the ocean. And so it just sits there waiting and things swim above it and then it swims up and grabs them. The hunter. So it's got a jellied forehead and its eyes are pointing vertically. The actual sockets are pointing straight up. Do you love it? I love it. There's also these fish related to them called slickheads, which is a little bit of a yikes kind of name, in my opinion. Also, these are some famous freshwater fish, at least in the Americas. You catch pikes and muskie, they're big predators. They're kind of like freshwater barracuda. They're very long, they're ambush predators. They can explode with a quick speed. I put this fish up here because it's just like too amazing. This is the aardvark amongst all the other actinopterygians. I said this weeks ago now, but the aardvark is one species in Africa, a very weird mammal that's in its own family and in its own order and all by itself amongst all the other mammals. The salamander fish is a fish like that. Those are the pectoral fins, those are the pelvic fins. It actually has a separation between its pectoral fins and its gills. So kind of like us, it has the ability to go like this. And it walks around on its fins at the bottom of little freshwater patches in the outback in Australia. It's the only fish in its family, it's the only fish in its order. And for a long time, everyone was like, what is this fish? Because it's obviously a little ray fin fish, because it's got Lepidotria and how they attach and all these other things. But it's all by itself in the outback, and it's a very ancient, weird, funny fish. If you want to look into it, I encourage you to look into it. The next bounce up the tree, we're going deep, for sure. So make some observations with your neighbors, talk about these fishes. I'm not expecting, of course, as we go through this day today, there's gonna be a lot of fish today that you guys are like, I know that one. Of course you don't. That's okay. Make some observations about these fishes.
That's actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Think so.
All right, what are some things we notice about these fishes? Probably all blind. What do we think of that? Probably all blind. Probably deep sea. So how does probably blind and deep sea go together to make an idea? So they definitely all can see. Some of them have actually big eyes. That hatchetfish has tremendously big eyes. But they live in a light limited environment. These are photos of them in the wild and the background is black. because they live in the middle of the sea. Something we're gonna get into later in class is like what the deep ocean actually is. And if you take a couple seconds to think about it, the biggest habitat on Earth by a lot is the uninterrupted blackness of most of the world's oceans. Once you go down like 100, 150 meters, it's black. And then it doesn't matter how deep the ocean gets, it just stays black. And that habitat is most of the surface of the planet. So these fishes have huge ranges, and there's a lot of really crazy stuff that happens there. And in a funny way, most of the space you can live in is this habitat, black, deep, cold ocean. Okay, so light, what other things about these fishes? Oh, interesting. So maybe some sort of jaw building stuff. Certainly they have huge lower jaws, right? Any herbivores? What are you all inferring immediately about their ecology? Everybody's a carnivore. Everybody's a carnivore. Yeah, I think so. Anything else? Yeah, unsettling. I don't know why the deep ocean makes things worse somehow in some kind of ways. So this dragonfish has a lure on its chin, this long extension. That lure that it can light up has some bioluminescence in it. So it can be like, come here to like other fishes. And then of course, that's what the teeth and the jaws are for. Something that I think is really unbelievable. Dragonfishes are probably, they might be the most abundant fishes on the planet. Their populations are easily in the hundreds of billions. And at one point in like the early 2000s, people thought there might be a true trillion dragonfish individuals on the surface of the planet right now. So that's crazy. These are abundant animals, but there's a reason you never see them because they live in the dark and black. I'll say one more thing about that fish up there. That's the hatchet fish. Its eyeballs also are pointed straight up. Its belly, its chin, and its tail on the bottom are covered with these photophores, these places where it can have the scales open or not. And it creates light, bioluminescent light from bacteria inside its belly and its chin and its tail. Those eyeballs see the light above it. It's like in the part of the water where it's not totally black yet. How blue is the light above me? And then they make the belly color that blue so that you can't see them from below. Does that make sense? Because all these guys are hunting each other. And if you can see the shadow and the silhouette, you go grab it. Hatchet fishes make it so you can't see them from underneath. All right, as we keep going up the tree, hitting another node, this one is one for you guys to please have. These are called acanthomorphs. Acanth means spine. And when you see morpha, that's like shape. You're gonna see morpha all over the place when we talk about any kind of animal stuff. So spine forms. And the one feature, the one character I want you to have for acanthomorph fishes is that on some of their fins, especially their dorsal fin and their anal fin, some of you noticed this in lab already when you looked at like the perch skeleton. Some of you drew the perch skeleton last week. There are spines leading those fins. And so some of these fish have multiple dorsal fins, multiple anal fins sometimes. And the first one is pokey. If anybody drew the sunfish yesterday, the centurchid fish yesterday, when you pulled out of the jar, very sharp. Spines on the anal fins, spines on the dorsal fins. That's a don't eat me defense, right? They also can signal with it, they do display with it. A lot of the fishes humans know, like bass, have these spines. You guys maybe have seen that before. But like a salmon does not, catfish does not have it like this. You might have spines in different ways. So the spines leading the dorsal fins, the spines leading the anal fins are an acanthomorph feature. So you've seen this already, but now going forward, as you're scrolling, when you're looking over your notes, everything after this is an acanthomorph. So the first couple groups of acanthomorphs we'll talk about. Here's some acanthomorph fishes. Talk to each other.
Yeah.
All right, what are some observations about these early diverging acanthophores? Tripod fish is in the running for always my favorite fish, because I forget about it every time, and then I see it again, and I'm like. So tripod fish, what's going on? You guys have the vocabulary to tell me what's going on, Describe that anatomy. You can talk to your neighbors, describe that anatomy.
Yeah, no, just. But,
Tell me about the tripod fish, what is happening here?
It has like extensions off of its fins, it looks like.
It's got real long fins, which fins are real long? The ventral part of the caudal fin, so here's the tail, pretty normal, except for the beginning part of the ventral portion of the tail. And then yes, pelvic fins that are just as long. Does it have pectoral fins?
are those the things that are in the air?
Way up there. Pretty normal anal fin, pretty normal dorsal fin. If you take away these things, it's pretty much like a boring long fish. But it's not, it's a tripod fish. And so these fishes are deep ocean fishes. They stand as tripods on the bottom of the ocean. They have very low metabolism. They just chill and wait. Somebody gets close, they'll go for it and eat them. But also they're protected because anybody else who's cruising around on the bottom, maybe a deep sea shark or something like that, maybe other fishes, maybe like a lobster, somebody who might eat a fish, they can feel that and go like, nope, and get out of there. So they can sit there on the bottom, totally still like that. I love tripod fish. Look at that shadow, that's ridiculous. What was it like the first time we had like a camera or a person in a submersible and they were like, what? And they saw it like standing dead still in the middle of the water. It's a great name, right? All right, so what else on the slide besides the tripod fish, which is admittedly a true hero?
The telescope fish's eyes.
Telescope fish's eyes, guys, pretty telescoped eyes. I actually don't know. I don't understand myself. Another mid-ocean predatory fish, gnarly teeth, big mouth. A lot of them have big mouths, but they just got to grab and swallow, get it in there. I hope you remember many slides ago on the eel slide, you guys saw the gulper eel, which is an eel that lives down there with all these things, and it had that mostly mouth body plan. Interesting. I like the jelly nose fish. I think it's really cute. If you Google them, they're always really sad pictures of like exploded faces because you bring them up from deep ocean where they're under so much pressure, their bodies like rupture, so it's really sad. So it's nice to see pictures of them down in the bottom of the ocean where they kind of just look like little ghost ethereal fishes. Look at that anal fin. Pretty cool. I like this very much. These are both these fishes called lizard fishes. This is the species that lives on coral reefs. Kind of cute. This is the deep sea version of a lizard fish. So adaptation to deep sea environments, interesting. Hopefully you're making observations about more than just teeth and jaws here. The other thing I'll talk about here is the lantern fishes. Lantern fishes have photophores, so again, a space on their body where they have bacteria that can bioluminesce, can make light. And they have these photophores on their face and then speckling all over their bodies. They have to communicate with these things. They're called lantern fishes because they light up. The thing I want to tell you guys about lantern fishes that I think are so cool is that they are also one of the most abundant organisms on the planet. There are billions and billions of lanternfish swimming right now. They come up into the shallow waters of the oceans at night. And in the daytime, they go back down to where it's dark again, but not deep, just like back into the dark. So they only live in the dark and they come up every night. And when humans started to develop things like sonar, we had a bunch of navies. So starting around World War II, but then especially in like the 50s and stuff, there was this phenomenon that militaries all over the world noticed, which was there was a deep scattering layer in the oceans. You know, the ocean is 2 miles deep here, but there's a 200-meter down solid, and no one could figure out what it was. And it wasn't until like the 60s, 70s when people realized there are so many lanternfish that sonar mistakes the swarms of them for like land down in the dark water, which I just think is crazy. So you'd have your aircraft carrier and be like, I know it's not that shallow, but it says it's shallow right here. And it's just the aircraft carrier going over hundreds of thousands of lanternfishes. Just super cool, super cool. All right, some more early diverging acanthamorphs. Some of these are fish you guys might know, like cod. Cod is a fish people eat all the time. It's a very white fish. It's a very nice fish to eat. Cod's kind of a sad story. So the North Atlantic Ocean used to be one of the biggest, most productive fisheries in the world. And then pretty much after World War II, starting though in the 1800s, it got fished to nothing and there's almost no cod there anymore. So if you guys are watching TV, which you probably aren't, but if you're watching YouTube and you see a commercial and Wendy's is like fillet of fish or whatever, McDonald's will say fillet of fish, Wendy's will say some other fish sandwich, and it'll say Pacific cod. Be sad, because it's supposed to be Atlantic cod and it always was, but now it's not. They have to go to the Pacific because we've overfished all the cod and haddock and pollock, which is a real bummer. This is a kind of cod relative called a grenadier. It lives down in the deep ocean. So like this one, but in the deep. Look what being deep does to you. Grenadier. This is one of those fishes I talked about when we did the phylogeny lectures. This is a dory. Fishes like this are one of the ones that like Aristotle himself like drew pictures of and described, which I think is really cool. We're going to talk about the opah and the oarfish later in class. The opah is incredibly cool because it's one of the only actinopterygian ray fit, bony fishes that has kind of endothermy. It regulates, and it has heat inside its body and it regulates that heat. So that's very bizarre. And then this fish here is called the oarfish. Oarfishes are really, really difficult to see in any way that's very nice. They can be 25 feet long. They live in the deep ocean. They're very long and silvery and shiny. They have huge dorsal fins and anal fins, and they just like are basically like this meter stick, but 25 feet long. And they just move around in the ocean like this, the mouth pointing up towards the top. When they wash up on beaches, everybody always takes a picture of them. One like little factoid about oarfishes is that a lot of they're all over the world, but there's definitely like sea serpent legends that are pretty reliably oarfish from like back in the day, which is really fun because this is a fish you don't usually see too often. Comments, questions about any of these fishes? Have some more. I hope you realize that the theme of today is like, this is Brandon, this is too many fish. That's the whole point. All right, talk to each other about these fishes.
US now.
All right, any observations, questions about these fishes? Why is the toadfish? End of question. The toadfish here. Toadfishes are very cool. They're called toadfishes because they're extremely vocal. Later on in class, we're gonna talk about fish noises, because they do actually communicate with noise a lot, and toadfish are some of the best. They make a lot of like frog sounding noises, and their face is pretty smashed, so they kind of look a little froggy. There's a very funny story from, oh gosh, I think it's like California, where all these people like got all riled up and like filed some lawsuit against this, naval base, because they thought the Navy was doing all these sonar tests, like underneath their houseboats, and these people couldn't sleep at night, and it was just toadfish. Under their boats. They're like, ruff, 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 and it's like coming up through their homes. So toadfish are super loud. They also definitely sometimes have venomous spines, so watch out for toadfish. I like this dude. Look how stoked he is to catch this snakehead. And how pretty is that snakehead? Awesome. There's a lot of very pretty fish in this clade. A lot of these are they're Southeast Asian. You guys probably see betta fish, like anytime you go to any pet store, sitting on an end cap shelf in a little sand glass bowl. These are very pretty fish. The boys are very showy. Big dorsal fin, big caudal fin, big pelvic anal fin. Pretty pelvic fins. To show off the females. What other things?
Very diverse body shape of plants.
Oh, tons of different diverse body shapes of plants, right? Do we know anything about this fish? So gobies are one of the most diverse groups of fishes. There's thousands of kinds of goby. Here's 3 of them. One kind of goby is this subfamily that's called mud skippers. Anybody heard of mud skippers before? Seen mud skippers before? These are fishes that can climb out onto the land. They have here's their pectoral fins right there, sorry, and there's their pelvic fins right there. And then they just like come up on the land, and that's where they display and mate and do things. So this is a boy with all his fancy dorsal fins erected, and they jump and they fight each other. I also think it's really cool that you guys can just at a glance make inferences about animals like this. This is a goby, but look at where the eyeballs are. They're like hippopotamus style, way up on top. So this is a fish that's like interacting with the surface of the water a lot, and like looking out of the water a lot, coming up on the land. It's very weird to have a fish able to come up on the land. I hope you remember, we saw the catfish that was walking. Here's a mud skipper. Every single actinopterygian, every single ray finned fish is also an osteichthyon, a bony fish. And one of the characters you guys got for osteichthyons was that foregut diverticulum, so a lung branching off the digestive tract. You still use it as a lung. Most of these fishes don't use it as a lung anymore. Some of them do or can or have reverted to it. So this mud skipper can like gulp in air and get some oxygen from it when it's got its gills out of the water, because it's like trying to be cool and dance around on land. Wonder for self-restraint that nobody said anything about the only moving fishes on the slide. Maybe I won't either. You guys can just be like, wow, I want to know what flashlight fish. That's not their eyeball. Their eyeball's up high. Their eyeball's right there. But they have like headlights under their eyeball. So all it is bacteria that make light, and then they can just like drop the little shield they have. The bacteria are always making light, but they can go, and then they have headlights that they swim with, which is very bizarre, right? Very fun, very, very different. Otherwise, pretty normal looking fish, I would argue. Okay. I want to take a quick diversion. So a point I want to make to you guys is, one of the reasons I'm leaning so hard into fishes is because we actually finally can. So what I mean by that is the phylogeny of all of these different clades of fishes used to just not be resolved. You could put all the gobies together, you could put all the catfish together, but you couldn't have a phylogeny where you talked about all of them all at once, because we didn't have resolution between the different, obviously monophyletic groups of fishes. It's only been, and I swear to you, 2012, 2016, 17, 19, 20, 20, 20, 21, that actual deeply thorough genetic analyses that can agree with each other, sort out what's wrong between them, have come out. We have a phylogeny for all of these pretty derived, advanced seeming actinopterygian fishes. And so that phylogeny is new to humans. So us scientists are always now exposed to these new ideas that are really cool. This is one I learned about a few years ago, and it really blows my mind every time, and I wanted you guys to experience it. So you've met eels already, you've met carps and goldfish, you've met trout, dragonfish, tripod fish, and you just met gobies. And that goby is representing all the fishes we still haven't talked about yet. There's some of the names, you've learned those names. whatever. What people noticed when they finally got a phylogeny of all these different teleosts figured out is observations like this. You can do this for any biological feature. So what I've done here is just thrown like a pretty boring dichotomous character measurement we could make for these fishes. Do they live their lives in sunlit waters on planet Earth, or do they live down in the deep, deep, deep ocean? And so here's how that character is distributed. And actually, there's a bunch of these right here. There's your dragonfish, here's your tripod fish. So forever dark versus sunlit waters. That's the phylogeny. That's the distribution of that life history characteristic, habitat characteristic. Talk to your neighbors, and if you had to mark on a phylogeny evolutionary changes, where would you hypothesize shifts in habitat occurred in this kind of in fish evolution? Suggesting, I'm hearing the conversations, I'm asking you if you were to like take your pen and mark a tick mark on the phylogeny and say there's a transition here, one way or the other between these habitats, where would you put the tick mark or marked sun, whatever you might think is going on here? That's what I'm asking you, does that make sense? All right, what's an idea we have? What's an idea of group guys? Leslie, you look like you're thinking about it. What do you got? Oh, go ahead.
Let's say basically tick mark trout, the dragon.
So you think you could put a tick mark here? And there'd be a transition maybe from a common ancestor, sunlit water, sunlit water, sunlit water. So maybe this is a thing lives in sunlit water too. Common ancestor of these lives in sunlit water, common ancestor of these lives in sunlit water. And then you're saying a tick mark here, because maybe on this line that's representing the population that's going to come to this common ancestor, there's a transition to living in black water.
Yeah.
All right. What else has to be true on the phylogeny if we follow that as our hypothesis? Yes, what has to be true for the goby then? Well, the goby would have to be dark, or you put another tick mark here, and there's a change from dark habitats back to light habitats, right? So a transition to darkness, a transition back to light. Are there other possibilities?
Possible that the dragonfish, tripod fish, and every other fish that you mentioned being in the dark in those two spots, separately has it.
So a tick mark here
Yeah.
for dragonfish and a tick mark here for tripod fish. And we can maybe assume or hypothesize that the sunlit of the goby and all these other fishes I haven't talked about yet and the sunlight of a trout and sunlight of a goldfish is inherited from a common ancestor, and these ones only individually on their own adapted to the dark. That's another hypothesis. Does that make sense? Those are two different things. Two very different things. If we use, just so you guys know this, if you want to put a fancy word in your hat, you kind of just did it a little bit. If you look at the distribution of characters of living organisms, something like habitat, something, whatever you want it to be, and then you try to reconstruct it across that phylogeny and understand these deep shifts, the fancy name for that is ancestral state reconstruction. Usually people do it with pretty high computing power. You guys are doing it in a pretty straightforward kind of way. So this is what Cass just said. A transition to dark individually for the dragonfish and the tripod fish lineage. Or we have what Will and that group said, a possible transition to darkness here, and then transition back to light here. In both cases, at least on this phylogeny, I'm expecting to see in evolution two transitions. These two, or these two. That is now the framework that biologists are in. I'm showing you guys this because there are so many examples, like the eels that go down deep, like some fishes I haven't told you about that go down deep, where everybody's like, you know what? Those are clearly individual instances of that one kind of fish evolving a member that goes into the deep ocean and adapts to it. That's very clear. I'm showing you guys this one because there's so many of these deep sea fishes right here. Like I said, there's a couple more. That actual ichthyology people who study fishes, are getting to the point where they're wondering, like, it might be true that there's an optimization, that there's more evidence for the idea that for a while, the common ancestor of all the fishes I haven't talked to you about, divergence is happening in black deep ocean. That's like an actual like 2023 area of study that people are like stoked about, that nobody had any inkling of. Everybody just assumed deep sea fishes are all on their own, independent evolutions of the deep, but the deep might be where stuff happened. Anyway, this is where a lot of the radiation happened, by the way, when the asteroid impact at the end of the dinosaur times happened. So that also makes people go, because what if all these deep sea fishes are relatively safe, and then they're the ones that radiate into everything I'm about to talk about. So exciting. Totally don't know if that's real or not. It's active science. And I just want you guys to say, cool. All right, back to what we were doing, which is just walking up the fish tree. So the last gigantic group of fishes, which if you guys go on Wikipedia or something, you're gonna see this word everywhere, are called percomorphs. That's not one you have to remember. I'm not giving you a character for it. I think a lot of very familiar fishes are percomorph fishes. So everything after this is a percomorph. Let's talk about that first one. That's everyone's nightmare. This sister relationship here. All right, talk to each other about these monophyletic group of fishes. These are each other's relatives.
Yeah.
All right, so I just want to say, tuna and mackerel are also one of the most commercially important fishes in the world. You guys have probably all had tuna, cans of tuna, sushi. Humans rely heavily on tuna. Tuna, as organisms, are one of the only gigantic predators. Some tuna are like 12 feet long as individuals. These are some of the only like apex predators that we humans routinely eat. We don't eat lions and crocodiles and sharks that much, but we eat tuna constantly. And they are apex predators themselves, which is very bizarre. Tuna are some of the fastest and most efficient animals in the world. We're gonna talk about tuna a lot when we talk about locomotion. They're extremely awesome. There's a lot of them. And they're all predators. Hilarious that this group, these all go together, these four, are with tuna and mackerel. The people who talk about this are always like, the public sometimes don't even think of seahorses as fishes at all. So then putting a seahorse with a tuna makes everybody be like, because you don't expect it. Seahorses are pretty heavily armored. They've got a lot of osteoderms. They've got like armor on the outside of their bodies. They're very different from everybody else. There's other fishes like seahorses called like pipefish that look a lot like this. This is a very derived form. Hilarious that these are some of the fastest open ocean swimmers on planet Earth, maybe ever. And then this thing like doesn't swim at all, it like holds onto a piece of seaweed with its tail that like curls around. And it barely doesn't. What things were you guys talking about with these fish?
Fish, horse, fish, look somewhat smaller.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of these guys that have this, and the mouth is just like this at the end. Their whole group is called Sygnathiforms. So syn is like fused and nath is mouth, right, or jaw. So they have long tube mouths. The snipefish is hilarious. A lot of them are very precision eaters. They're sitting there on the coral reef and they go into a little crane and go, yep, and that's all they do. We'll talk about Gurnards later. This is all the pectoral fin. They do the creepiest little thing. I'll show you gifts of it later. These are part of their pectoral fin. They look for stuff in like sand and mud, and they just go like this. It's really funny. That looks like little fingers. They're not.
Are red-lipped catfish
No.
cool?
This is a great group of fishes. What else to say about them? We'll talk about tuna a lot more too, because they're also they have such an ability to swim quickly and create power in their muscles that almost passively, just being themselves, they create through muscle action their own body heat. These are also an endothermic animal, an endothermic vertebrate, creating their own heat in their bodies, and then their gills, their eyes, their brains are much higher than the water around them, so they're very fast and smart. It's very interesting how these things work together, even in deep ocean waters. Yeah.
Could you give us a sample in between, like something that's common characteristic?
It's all genetic.
It's all genetic.
It's all genetic. I think there are people trying to like now that there's a really robust genetic framework for these relationships, people are like excited to find what could possibly be anatomical linkages. But something I want you guys to think about is that the radiation we're in part of the tree right now, so not true for trout a while ago, but now that we're in this part of the fish tree, this all happened in the immediate aftermath of the dinosaur mass extinction. It all happened so fast. And so when evolution's happening at like the species level, populations are splitting, those descendants might turn into something like this or something like this. And then the likelihood that we'd be able to have a fossil or something that preserves an interesting and tangibly visible today feature of their gill or something is really unlikely. So that genetic stuff, I mean, it's a great question. It's a very like, please help me understand. What's a red tick that goes right here? A lot of genetic and protein information. I don't know about any anatomical. Okay. Now we go up a little more. I'm going to give you these names, but again, you don't have to know them. This is also a fun pairing, I think. We're going to spend a minute on these guys, so take your time looking at them. There's a lot happening on this slide. In the Carangarian fishes, the Carangarian.
They're just like, it's like shark. Like, because shark like,
Yeah.
sharks like glide along. I don't know. They don't look like. They get huge. They get. Yeah, I do. That's your cover.
Yeah. I just looked at.
All right, what are some things about these fishes? Questions you have, observations you're making fresh right now, maybe things you know already. What's up with these fishes?
What's the archer fish like shooting out of the water?
What's the archer fish? So these fish live in the tropics of the world. They're so fun. They are predators of insects, but of insects on overhanging vegetation. So archerfish are extremely good at like lining up that beetle that's too close to the edge of its leaf and then going like, and they spit a jet of water and they knock the bug into the water. So they're called archerfish because like you can just sit there. I saw them in Australia, like shooting and knocking ants into the water. It's insane. That's what they do. That's their ecology. What else? What's going on with the remora? I mean, anything about remoras? Yeah, they basically have an extremely modified set of scale on their forehead that allow them to swim next to a shark or like a whale or a sea turtle and go. And then they're just passively stuck. And they ride around. And then when that shark rips a seal in half, they're like, nice. And they grab bits and pieces and they go back and stick to the shark. So these are little commensal, maybe, you remember that word, of mutualism that maybe isn't totally hurting the bigger animal. But these guys have a suction cup on their foreheads to glom onto other bigger ocean animals. Weird. A lot of big open water predators, mahi-mahi or dorado, sometimes called dolphin fish. You can eat that in seafood restaurants a lot. Jacks and trevallies get fished out a lot. They're also big predators. Barracuda kills Nemo's mom and all his siblings. Predators of reefs usually. Gigantic open ocean predators are the billfish. So that's things like swordfish, marlin. That right there is a picture of a sailfish. They usually have this extremely long rostrum that they use to like go into like swirling schools of something like anchovies you could think of. And just like stab one or just like knock a bunch out, cut them, and then they just like slurp up everybody who falls out of the school. Extremely efficient, all muscle. I'm hoping you guys, at least at some point when you were in school, read The Old Man and the Sea, which is all about one old guy trying to catch one of these, right? What else? Thank you. Flatfishes are the bomb. Here's the mouth. Here's this eye, which is the right eye, and here's this eye, which is the left eye. What's this thing? That's the dorsal fin. Coming down almost to the lips. Flatfishes are fun, huh? They're weird. We have to talk about flatfishes for a second. So flatfishes are a great example of something that even back in the 1800s, this is one of the animals that comes up like when Darwin and Wallace and everybody's yelling at each other in like England about evolution. How, Charles, would there be a fish? What would be adaptive about having an eye not all the way on the other side of your face? How does evolution explain a fish with eyes on one side of its place? Just so you know, these are the other common names for, there's a lot of different species of flatfishes, but you guys probably heard of flounder, sole, halibut, those are all flatfishes. Flounder and Little Mermaid always bother me, not very floundery, right? Sort of a weird, interesting looking fish. Anyway, sorry. So where do the both eyes on the same side thing come from? So of course, there's a lot of lanes biologists can get into to answer questions like this. This is actual development of flatfishes today. When a baby flounder is born, A, B, and C up there are teeny, newly hatched flounder. When it's born, it looks like this. But within a few days, this starts to happen. And by the time it's like a week or two old, that eye is now on the dorsal part of the body and the fish is swimming sideways with its anal fin that way and its dorsal fin that way and one pectoral fin that way. So in the development of fishes that we can see today, that's what that fish looks like right after it hatches. And then when it gets to it's growing up, its eyeballs move around to the side of its head. So what's the deal? Why is that adaptive? Those are all amazing questions. You guys should all become a biologist and figure it out. I don't know. I'm sure people have great answers to this because these fish are really well studied. I don't personally know them. Something I did just learn was that some species of like flounder and some species of halibut, everybody's right-sided or everybody's left-sided, but there's some where it's like totally random. You could be a left-hand or a right-hand sided of that species, which is super funny to me that it's not constrained. So this species, everybody goes to one side. This species, you could end up either way. So we can see it happen. We understand the anatomy of it. It happens in development. It happens through the ontogeny of the animal when it's very young, before those bones are ossified. They're there, but they're not fully ossified, so the eyeball can move, and it does. One thing that's really cool is there are, of course, fossils of early flat fishes. So this is a fossil from about 50 million years ago. Eyeball right there, eyeball up there. So this is an adult fish from 50 million years ago that looks a lot like kind of this developmental stage of the modern flounder that's going to end up like this. So we can track through the fossil record, through development, through comparative anatomy, how fishes like this might evolve. Flounders, soles, halibut are extremely successful predators. I guess this picture will be fine. They sit there on the bottom. A lot of them have really great camouflage. They can blend in, they can change color to look like what they're around. They have this weird capacity, their dorsal fins and their anal fins, they can walk on them by like doing a centipede-like thing with their fins. So they're moving around on the bottom without their tail or their other fins. And then their camouflage, they can see. So, weird, amazing. If anybody wants to do something with flatfishes, be my guest. All right, we're gonna make it. Next bump up here, this clade. I bet you guys kind of know something about those two fishes. This is one of the most diverse clades of fishes, these ovalentarians. Here's a bunch of them. Pretty. Smaller for the most part. Any questions or observations here?
What is the purpose behind flying fish?
Yeah, so okay, so we got big pectoral fins, big pelvic fins, and a long lobe on the tail fin that goes ventrally. So it's all predator escape. They're getting hunted by dolphin fish and jacks and swordfishes, those big predators you just saw. And these are open ocean, teeny little guys. So what they do is they shoot out of the water and glide for 50 yards, and the fish that's chasing them doesn't know where they're going to come in again. And so they actually, when they're gliding really well, and it's windy, this piece of their tail's long enough that sometimes you'll see video of them where that tail touches the water and they can get more power and they take off again. So they can stay above the water and get hundreds of yards away from their predators by gliding away, which is really cool. I hope you notice that like slide after slide after slide, you're seeing what I'm going to call their eco-morphological diversity. You can just think about it as like, look at all the different faces they have for like their diets. There's so much diversity in every fish clade. So you can imagine so much adaptation happening specific to like a family or a genus or a species relative to like this cichlid, which pretty much looks like a fish, right? There are more cichlids than there are catfishes. So 1 out of every 4 or 5 vertebrates is also a cichlid, just like, or sorry, 20 or 25 vertebrates is a catfish. A little more than that, 1 out of 20 or 25 vertebrates is also a cichlid. Cichlids are hyperdiverse. Also, this little dude down here is a pupfish. That is living in a puddle that's about this deep. This is one of those fishes I mentioned on Thursday in those like teeny little puddles of water in the Mojave Desert. And they just live like that. Hopefully never gonna dry out. Pupfishes are really well protected because they're so rare and they just live the most insane, dangerous lives. I wanted to encourage you guys to think about cichlids. These are some South American cichlids. Cichlids are extremely common aquarium fish. You go to the pet store, you're gonna see a lot of cichlids and you're gonna see a lot of those like piranha-related carassiforms. You might know people who have like an Oscar or something like that, like the cichlid. And actually, biologically, cichlids have been a huge study source for evolution and how evolution works. One of the best study systems in the world for species diversity, sympatry versus, vicariant allopatric speciation of lineages is in the Rift Valley lakes. So Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Malawi of Africa. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cichlid species in those lakes, each one with its own like suite of species. Like there aren't a lot of species shared between the lakes. And those are all cichlids. So there's tons of really interesting diversity. One of my favorite examples, which we barely have time to say anything about, is there's a lineage of cichlid in Lake Tanganyika that's a scale eater. So it sneaks up behind other fish and just bites off a single scale. And so its mouth is big on this side. But what's crazy is the fishes, people have studied in evolutionary biology that the fishes in that lake learn to look out. And so there is a like tick-tock over decades of those fishes having their mouth on this side versus having their mouth on this side. Because you sneak up from the left, you sneak up from the right. That's like 1970s biology, but like everybody was blown away when it came out. Look it up if you're interested. Here's more of these odolintarians. You probably know some of them. Cutie pies, I don't have time to talk about. Cutie pie, can't do it. Damselfishes are extremely diverse reef fishes. You guys probably know clown fishes among the damselfishes. They have the ability to live within stinging cnidarians, stinging anemones. They can live within them and not be stung. That's where they lay their eggs. All kinds of pretty stuff, interesting stuff. This one, the clingfish, also with its pectoral fins, pelvic fins, and mouth, creates a suction cup. So some of these fishes live in like really extreme rivers and they just like onto a rock and the water's right in their face and they're fine. Very cool. Look up clingfishes if you want. Lots of fun stuff. I'm only going fast because we have 5 minutes. All right, we're finally into this big clade here, which is one of the ones that's always giving people the most headache at figuring out the evolutionary relationships. These are these eupercarians. Not a word you have to know, but everything after this is in eupercaria. So tons of pretty coral reef fishes, all your wrasses, all your parrotfish. These are all eupercarians. So if you guys ever go snorkeling somewhere, you're gonna see a lot of this and a lot of the next couple slides. Pretty coral reef fishes are basically what's left for us to see, although there's other things too. Do you love it? On your own, a little bit of homework for you, Google stargazers, because when they're actually swimming and you can see their whole body, you're like, oh, that's not so bad. But when they bury themselves, it's a real nightmare. They're called stargazers because like if you go scuba diving at night, you can shine a flashlight and they're just there. With their teeth, with their eyes. Stargazers are pretty ridiculous fishes. So we're gonna talk about parrotfishes. These are herbivorous. Some of them, they eat coral. It looks like they have a beak. That's why they're called parrotfishes. They do not at all have a beak, like a turtle or a bird or a dinosaur might have a beak. It's completely different. Here's a whole nother bunch of eupercarians. I'll let you talk about this one for a second. There's some like non-easy names that are still around. Any knowledge, experience, observations, anything you want to say about these fishes? Lionfish are totally venomous, and so are scorpionfish. Some of the most venomous fish in the world are scorpionfish. Of course, it's Australia, but in Australia, there are scorpionfish that if you step on them, it's like a potentially lethal sting, and they look exactly like a rock. If you guys, again, on your own, if you'd like, Google scorpionfish, there's hilarious videos of people like on a beach, and they're just like standing amongst some rocks, and then the biologist like takes their pen and goes like this to one of the rocks, up on the beach, like above the water. It goes like this, and that rock only goes like that, and it has a mouth. And you're like, what? Only that rock is a fish? It's like, yeah. So they sit and wait. They're predators, of course. We have some of these here in Idaho, sunfish and bass. These are freshwater fish in North America that people catch all the time. They are part of this radiation. Groupers are close relatives to them, big predators of coral reefs. Lionfish are very venomous. They're meant to be looking intimidating. Their whole vibe is don't bite me, and I feel like you guys get it, right? Like they're making you know that. Lumpfish are the opposite, super cute. Look them up if you want. A lot of the coral, almost all the really pretty coral reef fishes, like I said, are right here at the end. So we already talked about all the wrasses, the cleaner wrasses, like that Will Smith movie, the parrotfish, you just saw them. All of this, these are so many of the pretty fish on the reef. The tangs, the butterflies, the angels, the grunts and snappers. I hope you guys can imagine that like dietary specialization, sexual coloration, these are all big features of these fishes that you could get into. Now hang on, I only got 2 more. You can do it. We're gonna make it. All right, the last 2 groups are bananas. So Cassie, here's your batfish with its ruby red lips. You guys probably know the anglerfish. This is a very derived fish. Also, this is one that everyone's like, oh, that's a deep sea adaptation all on its own. It's got the lure on its head, the forehead lure that lights up so they can eat stuff. There's all kinds of reproductive things about them that if you don't know, it's crazy. Handfish, frogfish, sea toads. What are these? Those are the pelvic fins, so it is like this. It is this, that is it, so is that, so is that. Just so you know, so this is a frogfish right here, eyeball, mouth, pelvic fins, this is meant to look like a sponge. This is also a frogfish with its eyes shut, its mouth shut. Don't you hate it? It's just like, it's a fish. Handfish is great, batfish is great. So these are all local forms at the end. Last slide, you guys, and now we're done with actinopterygians. Maybe the greatest clade in all of them, personal opinion, are these guys. Finally.
Yeah.
So what I will say about these fishes is that they're extremely cool. They're covered, most of them are covered in some kind of armor. They have almost no body flexibility. So all of their swimming, and some of it is really amazing swimming, is fin-based, but in completely different ways. Giant dorsal fin, giant anal fin, swims like this. Swims with pectoral fins. Some of them, well, actually this one includes boxfish. They have like little tails. All right, I know I'm out of time, so I'm gonna stop. Do yourself a favor, and as soon as you possibly can, Google baby or newborn cowfish, because they're just ping pong balls. They don't have any other things happening. Okay, that was actinopterygians. We made it. I'm very pleased. All right, now you guys have seen way too many fish.